They expected hard faces and hunger. Instead, the first smell that drifted across the Kansas fields was roasted turkey and wood smoke. In the fall of 1944, a work detail of German prisoners rode in the back of a rattling flatbed toward a family farm that needed hands for the harvest. Guards sat easy with rifles across their knees, boots dusted white with chaff. Prisoners, sunburnt thin, caps pulled low, stared at the big sky and traded grim stories about what Americans did to enemies. The rumor began as a joke. The farmer's wife had cooked for the prisoners. It made no sense. Back home, captives were hidden or hardened. Here the driveway was open, the windows bright, the radio spilling swing music, chickens scratched by the porch steps. The youngest farmhand, a boy with a split knuckle and a shy smile, lifted his chin and said, "Thanksgiving's tomorrow." Everyone eats. The word fell strangely in foreign mouths. Thanks for what when the war ground Europe to powder? The guard sergeant made a point of the rules. No wandering, no entering the house. Eat at the trestle tables only if invited and only after the family. Yet the invitation arrived as casually as rainfall. "You boys worked hard," the farmer said, rubbing his neck. "Sit, eat, then we'll finish the last shocks before dusk." He spoke like the weather, steady and unafraid. Abundance, bins of corn, stacks of pies, ham-glazed brown covered the boards. The prisoners hesitated, then someone crossed himself. They sat back straight, hands hovering over plates as if surrender were being measured in forkfuls. The farmer bowed his head and the table went quiet. He thanked the rain, the soil, the safe return of neighbors from distant fronts, and the chance to share what the land had yielded. The prayer carried no slogans, no rage. With the first bite, suspicion loosened. Butter and cinnamon replaced the metallic taste of camp tinware. What happened at that table did not end the war, move a front line, or change factory schedules. But it cracked something brittle inside men trained to see enemies as less than human. In silence, one prisoner touched the pocket where his mother's last letter lay, and understood that his first warm feast in months had been served by strangers unafraid to practice mercy in daylight. It felt impossible, and because it felt impossible, it could finally be believed here. The first meal blurred into evening light. When the guards finally signaled for the trucks, the farmers' children were waving from the porch with sticky hands and pumpkin pie on their cheeks. The German prisoners climbed aboard without a word, the taste of roasted turkey still lingering on their tongues. As the convoy rolled back toward the camp, something quiet had changed in the air. No lectures, no leaflets, no speeches could have achieved what that single act of hospitality had done. In one afternoon, the enemy had shown them an America that was confident enough to share abundance even with its captives. Inside the wire, that story spread faster than any rumor of battlefield victories. Men who had fought at Kasserine Pass or along the Tunisian ridges listened with disbelief. The younger ones laughed, Americans playing tricks again. Yet others older stared at their tin plates and wondered if it might be true. There had been whispers already. POWs assigned to pick cotton in Texas returning sunburned and smiling, men harvesting wheat in Iowa who wrote home about kindness they could not explain. This new tale fit the pattern, a Thanksgiving feast shared with prisoners, guarded only by decency. Across the United States, more than 400,000 German prisoners were held in over 500 camps. Many were sent to rural regions desperate for labor. Farmers, faced with shortages as sons went to war, petitioned local councils for permission to use POW work crews. Under the Geneva Convention, the captives were to be paid modest wages in camp scrip, housed decently, and fed as well as American troops. For most, this already defied every story they had been told about Allied cruelty. But the reality went further. Churches donated food, women's clubs knitted scarves, and sometimes, especially in the heartland, families treated the prisoners not as monsters, but as men who had simply lost a different war. That November, while Europe froze in smoke and rubble, fields in Kansas glowed gold under open skies. Here, Thanksgiving meant something larger than victory. It meant a statement of who Americans believed they were, even in the presence of those who had marched under Hitler's banner. To share a meal was not weakness, it was proof of a moral confidence stronger than any uniform. By dawn the following day, frost glazed the barbed wire outside Camp Concordia. In the half-light, a bugle's note carried across the barracks, and men stirred under wool blankets stamped U.S. Army. The memory of the meal, its warmth, the smell of coffee and sweet corn lingered like a fever dream. For many of the German prisoners, it was the first time they'd eaten to fullness since North Africa. Yet what unsettled them most wasn't the food, it was the manner in which it had been given. There had been no cameras, no propaganda leaflets, no speeches. Just ordinary people acting as though kindness required no permission. Officially, the War Department called it the Prisoner of War Labor Program. Between 1943 and 1945, captured Axis troops were distributed across America's interior to offset labor shortages caused by mobilization. They harvested wheat in Nebraska, repaired irrigation canals in Arizona, cut timber in Oregon, and stacked cotton bales in Texas. The arrangement was practical but also psychological. The United States followed the Geneva Convention not out of sentimentality, but conviction. Military planners understood that humane treatment preserved discipline, reduced escape attempts, and broadcast American strength more effectively than any poster. Mercy, when measured and orderly, became a weapon of persuasion. The Germans saw details no propaganda could invent. Trucks that carried them to work drove past schoolhouses filled with laughing children, something unthinkable near German garrisons back home. Radios played jazz instead of speeches. Newspapers, left lying on depot benches, printed jokes about Roosevelt and cartoons mocking generals, open criticism that would have meant prison in the Reich. To soldiers raised under censorship, this freedom of expression appeared anarchic at first, even dangerous. But day by day, it revealed a society sure enough of itself to tolerate dissent. Historians later noted that exposure to these contrasts did more to erode Nazi ideology than months of captivity. One lieutenant, once decorated for bravery at Tobruk, wrote that America's calm confidence frightened him more than Allied bombers ever had. "They behave," he said, "as though victory were already certain." Indeed, by late 1944 it was. But what these men were witnessing was deeper than military supremacy. It was cultural resilience, an ease of prosperity that Germany's totalitarian order could never manufacture. On those farms, between rows of corn and the smell of diesel engines, the prisoners saw the quiet face of a democracy at work, unthreatened and unafraid. For the Americans, the arrival of German prisoners on local farms was no small matter. Many had lost sons in Europe or the Pacific, and seeing men in gray uniforms unloading from army trucks brought complex emotions: anger, grief, curiosity. Yet, in town after town, resentment gave way to pragmatism, and then to a quiet decency. The prisoners were strong, disciplined, and skilled in machinery and agriculture. The farmers needed hands, the war needed food. Cooperation became inevitable. Still, no one expected friendship to emerge from it. Records from the U.S. War Manpower Commission show that German POWs produced millions of bushels of grain, harvested cotton, and repaired vital irrigation systems across the Midwest and South. But what went unrecorded were the small human exchanges that unfolded beyond the ledgers. When rain halted work, prisoners were given shelter in barns, handed mugs of coffee, sometimes even a slice of pie. Some farmers taught them American phrases: "Pass the salt, good work today," while the Germans shared songs from home. Guards, relaxed by routine, often turned away, allowing conversations to stretch beyond regulation. Thanksgiving gatherings like the one in Kansas were rare, but they captured the broader spirit of those encounters. The war raged on overseas, yet here in America's heartland, the moral lines blurred. Neighbors invited captured enemies to bow their heads before the same prayer. It wasn't an act of sympathy, it was defiance of hatred itself. To offer a meal was to prove that faith in humanity had survived the storm that had engulfed Europe. In diaries recovered after the war, several German POWs described those experiences as the first time they questioned what they'd been taught. "They fed us better than our officers ever did," one wrote from a camp in Arkansas. "If this is defeat, then perhaps we misunderstood victory." Others confessed guilt, eating well while their families starved under Allied bombs. The contradiction was painful but revealing. What America offered them was not merely food but perspective. That freedom could coexist with discipline, that power did not require cruelty. By 1945, as Germany collapsed, thousands of these prisoners had undergone a transformation invisible to the front lines. When they returned home, they carried memories of a nation that treated them not as beasts, but as men capable of change. In many ways, that Thanksgiving meal became a metaphor for America's quiet triumph, not just over an army, but over an idea. In Washington, policymakers quietly recognized the symbolic power of these encounters. Official directives instructed camp commanders to maintain humane standards, not only to honor international law, but to project the moral image of a democracy at war. The United States understood that how it treated its captives would echo far beyond the battlefields. When photographs of German POWs smiling in American farm fields reached Europe through neutral channels, they became unintended propaganda, proof that the Allied powers did not mirror the tyranny they fought against. The contrast was stark. While Allied prisoners in German camps suffered hunger and brutality, Axis captives in America were gaining weight and learning trades. Inside the camps, that policy took physical form. Wooden barracks were equipped with heaters, canteens stocked with cigarettes, and libraries lined with English and German books. Lectures on civics and democratic governance were held under military supervision. Many of these programs were conceived not as charity, but as strategic education, an early investment in post-war Germany's reconstruction. The hope was simple but radical, that men exposed to fairness and freedom, even within fences, might one day rebuild their nation on similar principles. Meanwhile, local interactions kept reshaping the narrative. On one Nebraska farm, a prisoner named Carl volunteered to mend a broken tractor engine. By sunset, it was running again, and the farmer handed him a pack of Lucky Strikes in thanks. "For a man who fixes what's broken," he said. Decades later, Carl's son would recall that story in a letter to an American newspaper, calling it the moment his father stopped believing every enemy was evil. Similar memories appeared across German memoirs after the war, moments of simple decency, witnessed among enemies who shared more than they imagined. When victory in Europe finally came in May 1945, many of these prisoners faced an unexpected sorrow. They were going home to a nation in ruins, leaving behind the strange stability of their captivity. At parting, farmers pressed small gifts into their hands, gloves, photographs, sometimes a folded American flag stitched from old cloth. One guard later wrote, "They arrived as soldiers and left as students." That quiet transformation, invisible to the headlines, would ripple through the next generation of Germans. The seeds of democracy had been sown not in classrooms, but in the soil of ordinary kindness. Years later, historians would look back at that quiet exchange, the meal shared under a prairie sky, and see more than sentiment. It was part of a deliberate moral strategy that defined America's wartime conduct. The decision to treat enemy prisoners with dignity was not born of softness, it was born of confidence. The United States, at the height of its industrial and military power, understood that mercy projected strength more enduring than victory parades. By late 1945, nearly all 370,000 German POWs held on U.S. soil had been repatriated. Yet when interviews were conducted decades later, many spoke less about guards or rations and more about the moments of humanity that unsettled their convictions. The kindness of nurses, the laughter of children, the abundance of food that never ran out. In post-war Germany, those same men became an unexpected bridge between two worlds. Some returned to teach, others to farm, others to rebuild shattered cities. Many carried habits learned behind American fences, punctuality tempered by fairness, discipline softened by empathy. Sociologists studying the Federal Republic's early democratic revival found that a significant number of civic leaders and educators had once been POWs in the United States. They brought back not ideology, but a lived example of freedom in action, proof that democracy was not chaos, but order with compassion. The Thanksgiving story survives today in letters, local archives, and fading photographs, a handful of grainy images showing German prisoners standing awkwardly beside American families, heads bowed in prayer. The faces are young, uncertain, human. In those images lies the essence of that forgotten chapter, a moment when a nation chose decency over vengeance, and in doing so waged a quieter war for the human spirit. No official proclamation recorded it, no general claimed credit. It happened in the dust of Kansas fields and the silence of countless small towns where compassion triumphed over hatred. The farmers who opened their doors did not imagine they were shaping history, but they were. They showed that the true measure of victory is not in the weapons built or the cities conquered, but in the ability to remain kind when the world is at war. For those German prisoners, that Thanksgiving became a memory they carried home, proof that even in humanity's darkest hour, decency could still light the way.